I'm Neil Gresham and I'm going to give you a beginner's introduction to hangboarding. Now, when we narrow things down in climbing and look purely at the physical training requirements, finger strength is at the top of the list. It doesn't really matter how strong your arms are or how many pull-ups you can do if you can't actually hang on to the holds, so finger strength is super important. Now, of course, you will get strong fingers from bouldering simply by climbing on the walls, and I'd say that's probably the most fun way to go about getting finger strength. However, when we climb, we naturally develop weaknesses and preferences for certain types of holds. Some climbers prefer to use crimps, other climbers prefer to use slopers, and it can be really difficult to address those weaknesses when we're climbing because we often shy away from them. And that's where hangboards come in. Hangboards are amazing for home training sessions on those nights when you feel a bit too tired or you haven't got the time to go to the gym. You can do a little quick HIIT workout at home. It's not about the length of the training or how much you do. It tends to be best if you just do small, short, high quality sessions. And I'm going to be showing you how to do that now. So who should hangboard? For years, it was popular to suggest that beginners shouldn't use a hangboard because historically there's been concerns about injury. However, modern training methods have evolved and it's now generally regarded that it's okay for beginners to use a hangboard, especially if you use larger grips and stand in a foot stirrup to lighten the load. However, it should be pointed out that for beginners, the main priority in climbing is developing technique and skill. So if you are just training on a hangboard, you won't really be working on your movement. So hangboarding does fit in, but it plays a supplementary role and climbing should always be the main event. The main hangboarding exercise is dead hanging. It's a relatively simple exercise to perform. You hang from the board using a selection of different grips on holds of different sizes. The idea is to keep your arms very slightly bent and to engage your shoulders and upper back muscles, although it is a finger strength training exercise predominantly. It takes a bit of practice just to get the balance and to learn to keep your body still, but once you've sussed it, you're away. Your local gym will probably have a hangboard, and if you fancy buying one to train on at home, it's worth trying a wooden one and a resin one first to see which you prefer. You don't need hundreds of different types of holds and pockets. Really, it boils down to having 3 different sizes of edge. A large one, which is usually 30 to 40 millimeters in depth, a medium one, which is approximately 20 to 25 mil, and then a smaller one, which is usually around 15 mil. It's really helpful to have a clipping point under your hangboard so you can attach a resistance band or a rope and pulley rig, and you can use this to stand in order to lighten the load when you're training. Hangboarding is often wrongly blamed for causing injuries, whereas usually it's pilot error that's to blame. There are a few great safety tips that you can use to safeguard you. The first is always to warm up properly, and you do this simply by doing sets using larger grips on the board and standing either with your foot on a chair or in a resistance band or a rope and pulley rig so as to lighten the load. You have to do several sets or several hangs like this over a period of at least 15, more like 20 minutes with rests in between in order to gradually acclimatize your tendons to the higher load levels. Next, when you're moving on to the main training sets on smaller grips at higher load levels, do a trial set where you cautiously test the load by easing your weight onto the holds before fully committing your body weight to the grips. Don't hang with your arms completely straight or with them completely bent and locked off. And beginners certainly should not use mono pockets, and also be very careful hanging with your fingers in a full crimp position. When you first start dead hanging, I'd suggest avoiding this. Remember also that hangboarding does count as a training session, and sometimes we hear stories of climbers doing this on rest days. But if you do a hard hangboard session and work your fingers, you'll almost certainly need to have some recovery after this. And it's super important to concentrate. Don't allow yourself to be distracted by your phone or other things that are going on around you. Connect your mind to your body. Concentrate on how your tendons and fingers feel so that you can be ready to let go of the board suddenly if you do feel a strain in your arms. There are 2 main grips that beginners should practice when using a hangboard. The first is the half crimp grip. This is when you bend your fingers at 90 degrees. Now the index, middle and ring will be bent at 90 degrees, but the little finger will of course be slightly straighter just because it's a shorter finger and it needs to be straight in order to reach the hold. This is one of the main grips that we use when climbing, and if you train it, it will help to develop really versatile finger strength, which will translate to holds of different shapes and sizes, pinches, slopers, crimps, and so on. The other grip is the open grip, and we do this just with 3 fingers, the index, middle, and ring. The fingers are straight, and we hook the first finger joint over the edge or slot that we're hanging on. It's a more passive form of grip. We can sometimes grip edges like this when we're climbing, but always we grip pockets this way. So it's really important to train for pocket strength using this grip. You can also train on slopers on your hangboard too, although I'd suggest that the best way to practice slopers is actually climbing. So when hangboard training, we sometimes need to make the load higher on the fingers, and then we sometimes need to reduce the load. And there are 2 ways we can do this. The first and most obvious one is to change the size of the hold we use. So if we use a smaller hold, that's more load on the fingers, but if we move up to a larger hold, that's less load. The other way we can do this is use foot assistance. So if I clip a resistance band or a rope and pulley rig into the clipping point underneath my hangboard, I can control how much weight I have on my feet. If I use a thick, stiff resistance band, that's lots of weight on my feet. But if I use a thin resistance band, that's less weight. But when I train with a pulley rig, if I put less weight on my pulley, that's less weight on my feet. But if I put more weight on my pulley, then that's more weight on my feet. So in terms of structuring your session, there's many different protocols you can use, but beginners should keep it simple. In general, avoid using the very highest load levels and the very smallest holds, and instead favor what we call base strength. Now that's when you use perhaps a slightly bigger hold and you hang maybe for slightly longer. You could do, say, 6 seconds on, 4 seconds off, and do that 3 or 4 or 5 times in a row. Or you could do 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off, and again, do it 3, 4, or 5 times in a row, then end the set, take a slightly longer rest, and then do it again. Usually for beginners, between 3 and 5 sets will be more than sufficient. Hangboards can also be used for training endurance by using what we call repeater protocols. That's when you hang intermittently for longer periods. We can provide you with more information about this at Catalyst. So in terms of scheduling, how many sessions should you do? Well, if you're going to be using the climbing gym at least twice a week, I'd suggest there's probably not room for any more than a couple of hangboard sessions on top of that. In general, with hangboarding, less is more. Keep the quality up and make sure you get sufficient recovery between your sessions. Enjoy getting into hangboarding, and we look forward to supporting your training at Catalyst.